Okay. Okay, we are recording. So again, welcome. And you can catch this on our YouTube channel, and Amy will send out the link to you all after. If you have registered, you will get the link. And if you, as ever, want to support our virtual series or anything here at the museum, I put a link into the chat. You can see it, everyone there. And it's where you can do through Canada Helps. And we thank you in advance. And if you want to know anything more about this subject, please feel free to email me. And Brian has given me permission to put his email up too, so I'll put that up later on in the lecture. So our current exhibit, everybody, right now is The Prettiest Town Beyond the Bricks and Mortar. And it highlights some of the history of some of our amazing heritage homes. And with that in mind, the lectures we are doing all complement that. And so today's wonderful lecture with Brian, who's extremely well known, as everybody knows, he's no stranger. Oops, make sure I got everybody here. He's no stranger to our town. He's a well-known columnist and author and consultant on architectural design, restoration, and heritage. And he is going to give us this incredible lecture on these three buildings that I think a lot of us are extremely curious about. And there will be times for questions and answers during the lecture and after. So I'd like to hand over to Brian and say thank you, Brian. Off you go.
Well, thank you, Babs. I'm not sure I'm going to live up to the billing of incredible, but we will try. So, welcome to an examination of the tales, the stories of three individuals who played a significant role in the history of the settlement of Niagara and subsequent to the settlement. Um, we're starting off with a slide which hopefully everybody can see. And it is actually a painting that was done of in the late 1700s, talking to the settlement of Niagara. It's a little further down the peninsula than we are, but nonetheless, it is a representative example of just what folks who came here to settle faced in their earliest days. So, having said that, let's move to our first tale. And it begins, as many tales do here in Niagara-on-the-Lake and Niagara in general, in New York State, what is now New York State, with the Revolutionary War. The family Secord, most of the family of age declared loyalist, and certainly one of the older members of the family, Peter Secord, stepped up with his brother James and several other members of the family, of their families, and joined Butler's Rangers in 1777. Now, in 1777, Peter was 53 years old. So he was a little long in the tooth to be donning a uniform and fighting in the field. But nonetheless, that's what he did. And he spent about a year in active service before, I guess, war, and especially war as in how the Butler's Rangers fought it, is a younger man's game. And so he went up to Fort Niagara with his wife and family, and he mustered out in 1778. Well, one of the interesting things is Peter was one of the first to muster out, and the British Crown really had no idea what they were going to do with respect to the Loyalists. Loyalists who, obviously would have lost significant holdings in where they were from. So what they did as a sort of stopgap measure is they said to Peter and folks like him, What we're going to do is we're going to reach back into history a little bit, a long way back. We're going to borrow a little of the Lower Canada settlement system, and we're going to pull on a little bit of the feudal thing, and we're going to let you all be tenants of the crown. Now, what is a tenant of the crown? Essentially, you can settle, you can build homes, you can build businesses. However, you don't own the land. So you're actually building on crown land. And when you establish a business, in part, your landlord is also your business partner. So Peter and James, in good faith, came across the river and settled in and around what is now the St. David's area. The brothers actually petitioned the crown to build gristmill and complementary sawmills. And I guess there's a little bit of controversy around this. Some folks believe that the mills that were constructed were not actually King's mills. In other words, they weren't actually in part owned by the crown. On the other hand, there's significant historical record of communication from the very beginning, wherein Peter and James pitched the concept to the crown, and the eventual putting together of the monies, the seconding of an army engineer to actually oversee the building. In any case, their mills got built, and you can see in this little tiny window here, peach trees in blossom, because it is believed that Peter Secord was the first person to plant peach trees in Niagara as part of the farm he was also constructing. So he was not only doing the building of the grist mills and the sawmills, but he was also actively clearing land and farming. Now, the thing is that Peter, as you know, is reasonable to expect, was not altogether happy with being a tenant of the crown. You know, he really thought that he should actually own the properties, the lands that he was developing. And there was let's call it tacit agreement between the representative of the crown and Peter Secord that he would eventually end up with land grants that would total 600 acres. He was not high on the priority list. You know, perhaps that's because the crown was actually enjoying being a landlord and getting some money out of these businesses. But nonetheless, what occurred then was that, there we go. By 1789, Peter's got and James have got the businesses going on. Peter has developed his farm. He is actively pursuing his grant still, because his grant is outstanding. But you'll notice on this particular survey that we're looking at right now that he is actually only got 300 acres, not 600 acres, as was promised. Now, this is because the folks that came a little later than Peter did actually got their land grants, and the agreement that Peter had with the crown was sort of, let's call it, overlooked a little. And some of the lands that he had been promised were actually ceded to other loyalists. Not happy about this was Peter, but he is still fighting to get his actual name on that 300 acres in 1789. In fact, finally, we'll just leave that for a minute, and we'll go to the next slide, where we'll take a look at Peter's home, because it is, as Barbara mentioned, um, a presentation that relates the history to the buildings. So this is an example. This is Peter Secord's house on 4 Mile Creek. Interestingly enough, this house was actually built in 3 unique and separate phases. So hopefully you can see my cursor on this. On the left here, I have sort of shown A. You can see the A down there. That is because Peter's original house was in fact what is now the basement of the current house. It was built into the bank, and it looked out towards 4 Mile Creek. So essentially what you're looking at here is what his wife, and 5 kids occupied for at least a decade. Now, this would have had, of course, a gable roof on top of. However, the house itself is built of uncoarse rubblestone. And when you go over to the right, you can actually see in this section I've labeled B, that is the second phase. So what they did was they took the roof off the original phase and they built directly up on top of the section A section. Now, these gable dormers were not there originally. So literally you can see what is uncoarse rubblestone. So uncoarse rubblestone essentially is found stone that is minimally worked and is not randomly placed, but rather sort of strategically placed. And you can see the difference in section B here to section C. If you look at how the rubblestone on section C it's much more refined. It's much more of a coarse rubblestone. So that means that the stones have been worked more fully to ensure that your mortar lines run more or less consistent across the building. So if you compare this section, where you can see there are literally round stones as a part of the uncoarse rubblestone, none of that appears in the final section of C. So you now have, and just to be clear, back to this on the left-hand side, you can see that during the restoration that was performed by the current owners, they've actually left part of the parging, the stucco, on this section. Originally, rubblestone buildings were not meant to be exposed. The stones were not exposed. They were essentially stuccoed over, and often they were incised with straight lines to give the impression of the much more expensive ashlar stone, which is fully worked blocks all the way across. In any case, so that is what Peter Secord's house and how it evolved over a period of time. Now, in 1793, Peter is still fighting with the crown for his land grants, and he actually got awarded, in place of the 300 acres he lost in the St. David's area, he was awarded another series of land grants, fairly substantial acreage over in Norfolk County near Point Pelee area. And 1793, Peter just goes, you know what? I'm leaving. I'm leaving town. I may never get the land grants that I was promised here, but I've got lands in Norfolk. So he up and moved out of town, basically. And um, 3 years later, 1796, his land grants here in what is now St. David's actually were awarded. But he sort of had reestablished himself in Norfolk. He's now into his late 70s, and he's going, I'm not moving back. I'm just not moving back. As a result, he chose to sell the 300 acres to his nephew, David Secord. So at this point in time, if anybody would like to ask any questions before we move into the next section of this, please feel free to shoot them at Barb. And if not, we'll just keep on going. Is there anything there, Barb? I'm not hearing you. You're muted.
Sorry, honey. Here we go. Yeah,
That's okay.
I don't speak to people to call me Barb, but that's okay.
I'm sorry.
I wasn't answering. No, there's nothing there popping up.
Okay.
Anybody got their hand shooting up there? No, I think we're good.
Okay.
Keep on
Super.
going. Yeah.
All right. You've driven past it all the time. You can see Peter Secord's house on 4 Mile. One final point on Peter Secord's house. There's a little bit of controversy around whether or not this was actually the house that was built in 1780. There's been some suggestion that, in fact, the next house we visited was the one that he built originally in 1780. I don't think that's the case. I think that based on where the creek runs, where his mill ponds would have been, where the grist mill and sawmills actually were, it makes much more sense that this building is actually the original 1780s building. So let's move on to Peter's nephew, David. And David's story also starts with the Butler's Rangers. In David's case, he upped into the Rangers again at the same time his uncle and his father did in 1777. He, on the other hand, actually stayed with the Rangers, and he stayed with the Rangers actually right through until the Rangers were disbanded in 1784. He saw a tremendous amount of action while he was with the Butler's Rangers. He fought in any number of battles. He is credited with having stepped in to stop the slaughter of prisoners taken during the Battle of Wyoming Valley. So basically, he hung in, he stayed with it, and remained in the Rangers until it was disbanded in 1784. I'm going to ask you to hang on for a second. I've got a little light flashing here. I'm going to turn it off. Sorry about that. Okay. So when David musters out, he applies for and receives a fair amount of his properties. Now, unfortunately, I'm a little. Oops. I'm a little. I need a little technical assistance here. Because I've got this screen sharing thing dropping down into this slide. So I'm going to simply say that Peter's original land grants were modified over a period of time David's were modified over a period of time. You can see by 1789, David actually has, in the blue here, a total of 700 acres that he's put together. So in 1789, then he actually ends up acquiring the additional 300 acres from Peter Secord. There. So David is an entrepreneur par excellence. um, he is generally credited to having established the commercial operations in the village, which would become St. David's. He owned two sawmills, two grist mills, tanneries, farming, a retail operation. Basically, well established and well positioned, especially given his land holdings as well. So in the center here is a painting, a sketch, I guess is probably more apt, of the house that David built. Again, this one was on the other side of 4 Mile. So if you want to visit where it is, because it's still sort of there, you turn off on Paxton Lane and go all the way to the end of Paxton Lane. And his house sat on the edge of the bank of the creek and looked down into the creek. The house he originally built looks a lot like this one, which you all may be familiar with. It's an original Loyalist Georgian presentation that's on Mary Street in Old Town. So we're back to war happening again. In this case, the War of 1812. Now, although David mustered out of the Rangers, he didn't muster out of service. He actually participated in the 2nd Lincoln Militia Regiment. And when the War of 1812 broke out, he was called into active duty. David is believed to have fought in virtually every major battle that was fought in the Niagara area. That would include the Battle of Queenston Heights, the Battle of Beaver Dam, Chippewa, and he actually commanded a regiment in the Battle of Lundy's Lane. During his total military service from the Revolutionary War until the end of the War of 1812, David was actually wounded in action 4 separate times. And, given the circumstances of the day, it's sort of amazing that he not only survived, but he thrived despite those wounds. So we're going to look at David's house now. Basically, this building is believed to have been completed by 1799. And you can see in the top left-hand corner what the house looked like in the original build. Loyalist Georgian, very straightforward, chimneys bracketing both end walls, center door, symmetrical presentation, 2 windows openings on either side of the door. Now, David actually passes away in 1844, and the house stays in the Secord family until, see if I can remember, 1878. No, sorry, 1873. During that period of time from 1844 until 1930, the house was, as I mentioned, remained in the Secord family until 1873, and then went on to the Hannawells until 1915, and then was acquired by the Paxtons in 1915. During this period of time, a summer kitchen was added to the end of the house. A portico was attached to the house as well, but no substantial changes other than that. During the Paxton's ownership, the house saw a fair amount of alteration. First off, as you can see here in, hopefully again, you can see my cursor, the roof was actually yanked off the house and put back on the house at a higher pitch to give higher headspace on the second floor, more volume. They introduced a fairly significant centered dormer in the house. They added a large porch, more of a veranda than a porch, but nonetheless, let's call it a porch. And they retained the summer kitchen. A fair amount of 1950 to 2017, the house basically went through a number of changes. Well, the Paxtons owned it. There was a fairly significant interior renovations that were done. You'll note that the summer kitchen is removed during that period of time and replaced just by a small vestibule. However, the major gable, centered gable, and porch remained in place. You'll also note that one of the chimneys was removed. One of the chimneys stayed, but they added a concrete block chimney to the outside of the building, very likely to service a new furnace system. So now we get to look at what David Secord's house looks like today. About 2008, somewhere between 2008 2012, the Paxtons sold the house. It was acquired by a developer. The house had been occupied until the early 2000s. However, after it passed hands, it's simply been allowed to go to rack and ruin. Now, this house is also uncoarse rubblestone. And uncoarse rubblestone is literally meant to be, as I mentioned with Peter Secord's house, covered with parging, with stucco. What that stucco does is it protects the lime mortar with which these houses were built. Lime mortar is a wonderful mortar. Wonderful in that it self-heals. So if a crack develops in lime mortar and you get 2 or 3 rains that fall on it, the crack will actually self-heal in many cases. However, it is not Portland cement. It is softer, and over time it is susceptible to erosion by weather. And as you can see from this photograph, the exterior stucco is peeling off. Now, down here under this window, there is none left. And basically what is happening, and above this window too, what is happening is the lime mortar has washed out and the stones are simply sitting in place by dint of the weight above them and the pressure around them. The roof has, at least 3 holes that I know of in it, actual holes, and is not sound. So the water is getting in on a consistent basis. And to a very real extent, it's a shame because it is believed that, not only is David Secord's contribution to the establishment of St. David's an important facet of its history, but it is also believed that Laura Secord, his actually, during her run to warn the British of the incoming American invasion, actually took rest in David Secord's house on that run. So it becomes a a landmark as well as an important piece of heritage history. Okay, so I'm going to break again here um, to see if anyone has any questions on at this juncture. No pressure.
There
I'll
is.
open it up to questions at the
Yeah,
end, but
we've got a question.
okay.
Who built the Loyalist house on Mary Street? Tried to enter this question in chat but could not post it. Oh, sorry about that.
Um, my old brain is great. It's like Swiss cheese. It's fabulous where it's solid and there's little holes in it. You're asking me a question that I know the answer to, but it happens to be occupying one of those holes right now. And I do apologize. If you send me an email, I can look that up in my files and provide that answer.
Okay, there's another question. Okay, you can actually, I'll post the email and please, anonymous attendee, look for that and we'll get that answer to you. Do you have any update on the future of the David Secord House? This might come in at the end of the lecture, actually.
Um, I know as of last October, um, our heritage planners were in process, um, working with property standards to address the house. Where it stands, I don't know. However, I would suggest that perhaps if you have the opportunity, it may be a question that's addressed as to current status in the next municipal heritage meeting, which will take place the first Wednesday of next month of March.
Good. Do you have, are you allowed to say the name of the developer who's left it at this state?
Um, Actually, I would rather not. It is a Toronto developer. It is a numbered corporation. Um, so it's been a long process. I know that the first order was issued in 2020, which was not apparently enforced. Whether it went, firm with, as a legal requirement or not, I don't know. But insofar as the developer is concerned, I can't address that one. And a numbered company was not going to help you much anyway.
No. Is it beyond saving?
No, I don't believe so. Now, to be fair, in 2020, the engineer's report said that the building was safe to enter. Both of them. They had two done. Um, it is it is being claimed now that it is not safe to enter and it is unstable. That may or may not be the case. However, all that being said, it is a stone building. And stone buildings, as long as you don't have a catastrophic collapse, the timbers, for example, that span the building from side to side, if you lose those, it becomes a much more difficult process to recover and restore the house. At this point in time, I don't believe that's the case. However, with the holes in the roof and the water getting in, how much longer that will be the case, I don't know.
And Bruce asks, has the developer ever been approached about selling back the house?
Selling it back to whom? So, so the um, the challenge is that unless or until uh, an assessment can be a proper assessment of the house can be done from a structural perspective, and a costing associated with the restoration of the house is concerned. it would be a challenge for an individual investor to step up and say, I will buy the house or I will acquire the house and restore it. Because you don't know whether it's going to cost, $1 million to restore this house or $1.5 million to restore this house. You just don't know. And it's one of those risks associated with, a house in this status. Because it's an unclear status. Again, we know in 2020 it was safe to enter. It was structurally sound. Is it today? I don't know.
Is it designated?
It is.
Okay. Would there
It
be
was
any,
designated in 2015
so a developer buying it, and what would be the reason if they were buying a historically designated house? Judy asks, why would they
because of the lands that went along with it.
decide it?
The land surrounding, I believe, in 2000, and it still could be in flux, but I believe that the property was slated for 44 townhouses.
44. Okay.
Yes. So, you know, the house was part of the land. The house is designated. You can't simply tear it down,
Yeah.
but you can allow God and the weather to do it, unless, of course, that overture is halted.
Um, David Secord was Laura's brother-in-law. I was just letting Maria know that.
Yes.
Yeah, brother-in-law.
Yeah. She was an Ingersoll, I believe.
She was. And
Yeah. There you go.
we have
See.
her direct
Oh,
descendants. So in the chat with you,
there you go.
Carolyn's right there. Listen, any information we need from the Secord, and I'm sure Carolyn would be happy to jump in.
Okay.
Okay,
Well,
carry on. Okay.
yeah, let's carry on.
Thank you everybody for contributing so far. Catch you at the end. Over to
All
you.
right. We are now moving to the property on which, until a very short time ago, Parliament Oak School sat. And we are going to take a look at what was on that house originally, or what on that property, I'm sorry, originally. So in 1846, an individual by the name of Judge Campbell purchased that 4 acres on King Street. Now, that 4 acres on King Street, the judge bought it because it was pretty much a straight and very short walk to the turf club and racetrack that was directly opposite the property. And on that property, what he did was he built a Regency style house, 2-story cubic form Regency, in a late Regency style. So the photograph I'm showing here is not the house, but it is a representative sample of what the judge's house would have looked like when he built it. Now, excuse me, he passed away a few years later, and in 1865, his widow actually put the property up for sale, and it was acquired by an individual by the name of Josiah Plumb. Now, Josiah Plumb, interesting guy. It appears that Josiah was born in Niagara Falls, but was in business in the U.S. And he actually was a very successful businessman in the U.S., but decided, for whatever reason, in 1965 to move to Canada. And basically, virtually upon landing here and acquiring the Campbell property, he set to work renovating it. Now, again, he's a wealthy individual, and in the style of the time, the most popular style of the time was Second Empire. So he took the original cubic form Regency house that was on that property, and he put a 3rd story on it, with the Second Empire roof style. He put an addition on the back of the house, and again, with a 3rd story. And you can see down here what the house looked like, and that's when I'm pointing here, I'm talking about the lower left-hand corner of your screen. There is a photograph of the house as it was completed. Now, this property was, I mean, this was a mansion. Let's be fair. Um, it it contained 8 bedrooms, several modern bathrooms. It contained entertainment spaces, which included a billiard room that measured 20 by 30, not a small space, and another 608 square feet devoted to a ballroom. So let's talk about being the center of society here, because Josiah, in addition to rebuilding his house, immediately upon arriving in Canada, became involved in the political scene. Um, he was very well connected, or became very well connected, both through existing relationships and subsequent relationships. Um, and in building this house, what he attempted to do was to make it a center of society, and not necessarily just society in the town of Niagara, but society in general, in a general terms. So he had as guests in his house Lord Dufferin several times, the Marquis of Lorne and his wife, who was the daughter of Queen Victoria, Princess Louise, the Prince of Wales, who became King Edward the Seventh, and the Duke of York, who would later take the crown as George V. So this was a mansion. This was a center of society. This was very much see and be seen as part of the sort of upper crust of Upper Canada. Now, perhaps there wasn't as much emphasis as Campbell. Judge Campbell was much more involved in the local scene, but again, in the lower left-hand corner, you can see these little figures on the lawn. I hope. I hope. Um, Well, those are folks playing tennis on the tennis courts, and actually the tennis club here in town was established and used Plum's tennis courts for a number of years before moving forward on their own. So after Plum passes away in 1888. It's acquired by an individual by the name of Sayer, and subsequent to that, Arthur White. Now, the house underwent some changes, and that's typical, to be fair. The original side, I'm going to call it a sun porch that was on the house here is now gone, and there's just a grape trellis. The other thing, which is sort of sad, quite frankly, is that that beautiful Regency-style bell-curved veranda that was across the front of the house and across the side of the house. Let's go back. There it is. Was removed and replaced by a let's call it neoclassical, 1920s version of neoclassical, with strangely enough white cedar shingles around the top. So what occurs now is that Arthur White, who is the owner, hits the Depression and has some significant business reversals. Essentially, he tried to sell the house during the Depression, and there wasn't a lot of takers during the Depression for a mansion of this size and scope. However, what occurs is it doesn't sell, and as a result, it is actually confiscated for tax arrears by the town. The town then goes, let's try to sell it. And they tried for a number of years to sell the property and simply had no takers. They tried, over in the stateside, they tried here. They could not move this house. And as a result, when in 1943, basically the town said, you know what, we need a school. And they cut a deal for the Board of Education to build a school on the property. And 5 short years later, that house was demolished and lost forever. And interesting story goes along with this. Prior to actually selling the house to the Board of Education, the property, the town actually opened the doors of the building and said to everybody who lives in town, come and take what you'd like. And townsfolk did. So if you're living in an old house, and by old, I'm talking about pre-1940, and you happen to have a black or white marble mantelpiece, it could have come from the Plum Mansion. The doors, the hardware, the fixtures, they were free, and they got taken and they got installed in a lot of folks' houses across town. But net, it is what happens when there is a lack of commitment, I guess, to and again, I'm not blaming the town in 1943. They had tried, and they were unsuccessful. And that having been said, when a wrecking ball is final, once the wrecking ball hits, there's nothing left to recover. And what we see on this slide is we see a house, Peter Secord House, which incidentally has been in the same family since 1903. The current owners are the ones that are responsible for really this restoration and its current presentation, which is a really fine piece of work. We have, the Plum Mansion gone completely, and we have the David Secord House, which is clearly dying. And so it is, in my opinion, fundamentally important to this town, and moreover to Niagara in general, and to the province, arguably the country, to look at a piece of heritage, piece of heritage like the David Secord House, and make sure it is saved. And that, I suppose, is my preaching moment this morning. But nonetheless, I'd like to thank you for hanging in with me. And I'd like to open it again to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Brian. It's amazing how when we have these lectures on these homes, there's always a political angle. And, we are trying to stay away from being too political with these lectures and present the historical aspects, but you can't really avoid it, can you? And, look what happened next. We all fought to save the school, So here's a question. Was Plum a US or state senator?
He was a Canadian senator.
Canada, yes. Canadian.
Yes. So he served, let's see, he actually served he served as a member of Parliament, and then he lost his seat, and MacDonald appointed him to the Senate, and he became Speaker of the Senate, I think the last year before he died.
I think it was the Street who came up before, who was the US politician who came up I had it before, right? It was on that property because wasn't it street? I'm getting my, I don't know, someone else out there is going to correct me on this, but I think it was, and that's where the American senator came in. I'd have to look it up. Should have said
Yeah,
anything
I'm
because I
not
might be
sure
wrong.
which building you're referring to or property you're referring to.
Before Plum,
No, no, before Plum it was Campbell.
it was
And
Campbell.
Campbell was a judge
Campbell, yes,
here.
and he married a street. That's it. He married a
Could be.
street. The
There
woman
you
was
go.
married, and he called her the prettiest street in Niagara. That's right. Or no, but yeah, and I think he came up from the States. Okay, who else? Anybody else here? I'm not seeing anything else here. I think the pictures were shocking when you brought the David Secord picture up. It was shocking to see. And a house has personality and character, doesn't it? And you see that, and it's heartbreaking. It's obviously there's quite a lot of movement to try to save it. Is there anything you want to add to the story of the current process in trying to restore it? Is there anything you've missed?
No, I think it remains in limbo. We are certainly actively communicating as much as possible, um, uh, to the general public, um, and the folks that live here in town of the situation. The problem with the David Secord House, realistically, is it's at the end of Paxton Lane.
Mm.
So you have to make a deliberate effort to go to see this house. You don't drive by it every day. As a matter of fact, it's past where the golf course is in St. David's. It's literally at the end of the road. So it's hidden. And when something is out of sight, it's often out of mind. And the awareness is simply not there. So I think the process of raising awareness is an important one. But
Hmm.
again, it's within the context of again the history of the what is now the town. I mean, um, and the importance of the individual who built the house in St. David's. I mean, St. David's was literally originally referred to as Davidsville,
Right.
right? And became St. David's. So it attaches you know um, the
As
position.
Carolyn McCormick asked, is there, anyone interested in wanting to help save the David Secord House? If you wanted to, what would you do?
Contact me.
Contact Brian. And I put
Yes,
his
or
email in the chat, but you can always just email the museum and we will send it out if you don't want to scroll back in the chat. Can you attend the Heritage Committee meeting in March? Can anyone attend?
yes,
How do you do
yep.
that?
It's also live streamed.
Just
Well,
live
it starts. Municipal Heritage Committee meetings are open to the residents of town. It starts at 6 p.m. As I said, the first Wednesday of each month,
Okay.
and I encourage people to do so. I think it's um, uh, a positive um, thing when people become aware of the processes and the deliberations that go into making heritage recommendations.
True. Absolutely. Who is the contact at City Hall regarding historical restorations?
Um, well, there is no direct contact per se. Um, at you know Regarding a restoration. A restoration is the town could restore this house. Well, they could stabilize this house. So they could enforce, provided all the paperwork's in place. Let's be very clear on that.
Mhm.
An order has to be issued. It has to go through process. It has to be recognized as final, and then it can be enforced. And if the owner of a property chooses not to comply,
Mhm.
aside from the fines,
Mhm.
the municipality can step in and take it over. And in terms of take it over, not ownership, but to restore the house, put a new roof on it, stabilize the walls, et cetera, et cetera. And then the cost of that is added to the taxes of the property. So the owner pays for it anyway. And of course, having a municipality, um, I always laugh. I wanted a second culvert put in at my property, and I had done so before, and it cost, I figured it cost $500. Well, I can't put in at my own culvert. The town has to do so. So $500 became $1,300. Um, uh, it's expensive
Mhm.
anytime a municipality steps in to do work that could otherwise be done by professionals at a lesser cost. And it's not the municipality's fault. It's just the way it works.
Well, Bruce asks us, does the legislation to protect houses that are designated, does it need to be strengthened?
Well, our current premier actually weakened it
Yeah.
um, in several ways. Um, and he made it more difficult to designate a hub property. He made it um, more challenging for towns to um, keep track of potential heritage designatable properties. He put timelines on them. I mean, right now there's a timeline in place which essentially says that, and by 2027, I believe it's January 1st, 2027, if you have a property on the uh, the list, which is not designated but of significant historic interest, and it hasn't been designated by that date, then it comes off the list and can't go back on the list for 5 years.
Mhm.
And what that means basically is when a house or a property is on that list, if a demolition permit is applied for, then it automatically becomes a review by the heritage planners and the municipal heritage committee. When it comes off that list, there's no stopping it.
Right.
And those are just two examples of weakening it.
Um,
So yes, it should be strengthened at least to what it was before the current government, you
mhm.
know, mucked with it.
Where are those heritage meetings held? Asks Judy.
At Town Hall
Town Hall.
in Virgil.
Judy also asked, this is the political question, but is this the same thing that could happen to the Rand estate? I guess in the means that if it's just left.
Now you're asking me okay. So the Rand estate, and this is just my opinion, let's be very clear. The Rand estate has gone through a, as we all know, a number of challenges, which included going before the Ontario Land Tribunal. Um, in fact, the Land Tribunal found in favor of the town and SOAR's um, um, position in that hearing, and the current owner of that property is now obliged to a number of conditions, which include direct consultation with the town, with SOAR, and I believe with one of the neighbors who on any future development plans for that property. Now, why did they win? Is the question. That's really the important question. And they won, in my opinion, because of the strength and consistency of the argument. So from the get-go, um, the heritage planner involved from the town said no. SOAR presented consistent arguments supported by experts. And it is that consistency or lack thereof. So in this case, it is that consistency which resulted in a win for the preservation of the property. It is that lack of consistency, on the other hand, which often results in a loss before the Ontario Land Tribunal. The Ontario Land Tribunal depends very, very heavily on the reports that are filed on any change to a property. And if you have argument, um, uh, you know, I mean, sometimes I feel sorry for some of our town planners who have to go before the OLT and actually argue against their original recommendation, which is untenable. In any case, there you go. So I tried not to be political, but
That's good. And I think it just speaks to the fact that if you believe in something, you've got to stay with it. and people hope that you'll stay quiet for a long time and it'll all just go away. But I think we've shown in this town over the last 100 or so years that we do stay with it. And preservation and heritage is really, it is a really important part of our history. And I think that everything you're doing and all of our wonderful people that come and talk about it in our lectures and the museum itself, this is part of our mandate. And I think we're very lucky to have people like you and others so impassioned and keeping the knowledge alive. And, from everything you're doing, thank you very much. And I think everybody would say that. It's been a
Well,
pleasure.
I think the folks who tuned in to listen to me ramble today deserve a round of applause because I appreciate their commitment and interest and effort.
Well, we're coming back next week for the last one of the virtual lectures, and we're with Dr. Richard Merritt. Everyone knows Richard very well, and he will be talking about that other fascinating, enigmatic subject, the wilderness. So get ready for that one. And wouldn't we all like to just go around there and have a look? So stand by for that. I hope you all sign up for that. And for this wonderful lecture, if you missed any of it and you had to nip off, it'll be on YouTube. And thank you very much. We're getting lots of thank yous. And thank you, everybody, for sticking with us. And it will be on YouTube. And Amy will send you out the link. Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks,
You're
everybody.
quite welcome. Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.